Welcome back to the Six Sad Lit podcast, where we venture deep into the darker corners of art, literature, and the human experience. Today's guest is an absolute legend in the world of queer horror, satirical romance, and unapologetically weird fiction. I am thrilled to introduce the one, the only, Chuck Tingle. Chuck is a USA Today best-selling author, a two-time Hugo Award finalist, a Bram Stoker Award nominee, and an Audi Award winner. He's also a mysterious masked force of nature, an anonymous creator who wears a pink bag over his head and writes stories that are somehow hilarious, heartbreaking, horrifying, and healing all at once. From his self-published satirical erotica known as Tinglers to his acclaimed horror novels with Tor Nightfire like Camp Damascus and Bury Your Gaze, Chuck writes to prove that love is real. Because love, as he says, is the most important tool we have when resisting the endless cosmic void. In this conversation, we dive into the cathartic power of horror, the politics of the body, the radical potential of absurdity, and what it means to create art as protest. We talk about Chuck's latest novel, Lucky Day, the existential battle of bisexual erasure, and how being an outsider, artistically and personally, can sometimes be your greatest strength. So buckle in, buckaroos. Whether you're here for monsters and khakis or deeply personal revelations about identity and love, you're in the right timeline. Good morning, Chuck Tingle. Thank you so much for joining me. How are you going this morning?
Thank you for having me. I am doing just dang wonderful, but that is most mornings. It's pretty hard for me to have a bad day. I will be honest, which is a blessing. It's a blessing and a curse because the world is in a tumultuous place. You know, there's a lot of up and downs, yet I remain unfazed by that. And I think for my health, I should allow myself to be a little more fazed by it, but I am not. I just keep trotting.
Do you know, that is exactly why I was so looking forward to chatting with you particularly, because I know that, you know, everything you do is that I have read is always in the pursuit of love and positivity. And I just thought, you know what, this is a great time to talk to you because I think we all need a bit of a reminder of that. How do you stay so positive and how do you carry that through into your work in the face of so much externally that might have us feeling otherwise?
Yes, I think my innate positivity is not, I don't know, it's not necessarily something that I have to work at. It's kind of like my natural state. And I hesitate to like push on others, hey, cheer up. I kind of think that that's the worst thing you could, like, you know, no one wants to hear that. And also it's not natural. I mean, our bodies, you know, we have pain, we have sadness for a reason. That's an important part of existing. So it's not like a toxic positivity of like wanting to eliminate that. But I do think that my perspective on things is generally that underneath all of the layers, whether it is, you know, a personal situation or a political situation or anything, that the core of our existence does drive us towards community, towards love. And I think that the logic behind that wins out every time. So it's not like a sort of existential faith-based argument for me. It's just what I see. Since the beginning of the universe, we have essentially been pushing back against the endless cosmic void and filling it with ourselves, whether that's, you know, mold crawling across a dang rock or a fish climbing onto the land or now human beings wanting to create art or paintings and books and music. It just, like, existence has this drive to express itself and to create more of itself. So I see that as an important thing to recognize, and then to recognize that many sort of, I would say, problematic thinkers of our time, especially those trying to talk to like young men, like to say, oh, well, then you need to be an alpha. You got to be aggressive to take more. When really, if you actually look at the way nature functions, community and love and communication, that is actually what makes us thrive. It's not being bigger and meaner. It's actually being more understanding.
Oh, I love that. I'm quite interested in the dichotomy between pure belief in love and human understanding with the genres that you tend to lean towards. So I've read both Camp Damascus and Bury Your Gaze. And I love them both, by the way. And I'm
thank
so
you
thrilled
so
that
much.
you've got a new one coming out. I'm so excited. And also, I listened to your podcast feature on Publishing Rodeo, I think it was last year. And I heard that you've got many more books lined up as per your publishing deal, which is great news.
I have
for
a
us.
book. I have a book coming out called Lucky Day that Buckaroos can pre-order. That is funny that we already jumped into the deep end of sort of existentialism in art, which is where that's where I prefer to swim, to be honest. So good on us. This is great. But I think Lucky Day is definitely my most existential piece of writing and is pretty far out. I think Buckaroos will like it, but certainly if they're interested in the things that we've already talked about, these kind of bigger ideas about existence, it's kind of what the whole book is about.
That's so exciting. I definitely think that fans of yours and listeners of this podcast are interested in bigger ideas about what it means to be human. And that's why we're sort of drawn to these dark fiction or darker corners of the literary world, because it's interesting to see what happens when you put a person in a challenging situation and they're free to be really human, and how do they respond to that? What drew you to horror as a means of communicating your message, or what's interesting to you about that?
Horror has always been my favorite genre. I have had offers in other fields, other things, different genres, and I'm just it's not where my heart is. This has always been where I like to trot for a number of reasons. I think the most succinct one is simply the fact that I do care about love. I do care about, a lot of my books have a message, and because of that, I do think that light shines the brightest in the darkness. If you want to tell a story about the power of love, then it kind of makes sense while you're picking what characters can tell this story the best, what setting, what genre is important too. And so horror, despite kind of the bad rap of being this sort of morbid place, and I even say this in Bury Your Gaze, horror is not a celebration of death, it is a celebration of life. And I think, you can go to these dark places and take really big swings about life and love because it's such a contrast.
I love that light shines most brightly in the dark. I'm interested to know, when you began writing your horror novels after writing your Tinglers for so long, what inspired you? How did you make that shift? Because for those that don't know, Chuck writes these short fiction erotica, but it's almost like satirical erotica, and it's always got a deeper meaning to it, which I just love. I think it's so refreshing and interesting to read. And I'm interested to know what took you from writing your Tinglers into writing Camp Damascus for the first time. What was the inspiration there?
Well, I think there's a couple of things I could get into. One, the genres that I like exploring are genres of the body. In a literal sense, they are on little side missions to promote or to provoke a physical reaction. Horror, you have a scream, you have fear. Erotica, you have arousal. Comedy is another one where you have laughter. And traditionally, these genres have been kind of looked down upon. You can see it bring up to a friend that you're reading a romance novel and see how they react. They are looked down upon as being lowbrow. And I think in a broader sense, this disconnection from the body is something that the powers that be will always be pressing. Whether that is religion saying, your body is incorrect, your feelings are incorrect, you need to elevate to sort of a higher godly place beyond your body, or just conservative politics a lot of the time in trying to control women's bodies, trying to create law. There's so much where power is generally taken by controlling the body and by saying that your body is less cultured thing, that highbrow means your brain and lowbrow means your body. And so I have really always rejected even the idea of high and lowbrow in art, and my favorite art is a mixture of both. It's someone like like John Waters would say like elevated trash or something like that. But I think that's a little, I don't even think it's trash. I think that that it's all just art. And so I think that I'm drawn to these genres because they are looked down upon. And that's, again, with contrast, I think there's so much like really thoughtful art that you can create using these genres that are typically maligned as like lowbrow and not worthy of like serious critique.
Highbrow is the mind and lowbrow is the body. That's great. And very interesting. I think we see that too in cinema, right? Because horror movies always get snubbed at the Oscars when there are some excellent performances. Have you seen Nosferatu? The latest Nosferatu with
I see just about every horror. I go to a lot of movies. You're not supposed to say this as an author, but I say it because I don't give a heck. I don't read very much. I read like my buds' books for blurbs, and I have a lot of author friends now, so I read all their books. But reading is like not my big art form. I love going to movies. So I go to a movie probably, these days once a week there's a new horror movie almost, it seems like. And so I'm seeing pretty much every horror movie that comes out.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite that you've seen lately? Because I love horror
lately.
Movies too.
So overall, my answer is kind of boring of like what's my favorite horror movie is probably Scream, which is it's a great movie. I always just feel silly because it's not like I've seen all the like new wave French extreme horror and like I've seen it all, but just my favorite is a very popular film, Scream. But I would say lately, like what did I like this year? Probably Strange Darling was my favorite of the year. I don't know if buckaroos have seen it because it was very small. Pretty small release, I think.
Yeah, it kind of leads to my next question of what really inspires you? What different things inspire you?
So like I said, I am not a big reader, and I should get into that a bit. The reason that I talk about it is because as an artist, as a writer, there's always going to be based on your medium, certain things that you kind of have to say, that you have to, it's just that, or people won't take you seriously. I don't really care about being taken seriously. Obviously, anyone listening to this, I wear a pink bag over my head. So it's, I am fine with people disagreeing on my perspective on art. And because of that, I will say, if you read any writing book from Stephen King to anyone else, anyone who's said, here is how you write, the advice is always to read more. And that is fine. It's great for some people, makes a lot of sense. I don't really read. Like I said, I watch films. So the pacing of my books is very tight, like for a horror novel, because I generally will use screenplay pacing, which, amounts to like a 2-hour film. And I'm using that to write a novel, which makes it really quick. And then I always write in first person, which is also kind of unusual for writing something that streamlined. And also you don't really do first person films. Like you can jump around to jump all over the world and follow different characters in a film. It's rarely just focused on this one person. So this combination has created a really unique thing that I would not have gotten if I came at it in the traditional way. And so I like to say this because I have found success in doing something on my own, and I want other buckaroos to realize if you come at art in your own way and it goes right against what everyone says you should be doing to make this art, and you're making something beautiful or that resonates with you or resonates with this timeline, don't feel like you have to change, like there's some one correct way to do it. Gosh, that was a tangent.
No, I love that. I love that so much. And actually, as you were speaking, I had a bit of a light bulb moment, because when I'm reading your work, it actually reads like I'm watching a horror movie. That's the experience that
Yes, thank you.
Had.
You hear that? I mean, that it's interesting. I hear that a lot, and I think some folks get that, and that's just because of a certain quality of the writing. For me specifically, I do think it's because I am following film beats and I pace it like film. So my influences, yes, it's horror movies, but it's music, it's performance art, it's fine art, and all of these things. I kind of have this like pantheon of my 5 influences, and none of them are writers. And I'll go through them. It's the 2 Davids, the 2 Andys, and Jordan. It is first of all, David Byrne, probably my number one singer of the Talking Heads, taught me so much about art, about myself as an autistic person. That, David Byrne, music of the Talking Heads, biggest influence right there. After that, David Lynch, filmmaker. And then the two Andys would be Andy Warhol for his perspective on art, and Andy Kaufman, also perspective on art and like seeing art as outside the performance. And then the last one would be Jordan Peele, who is the most kind of recent one, and that's another filmmaker. I tend to see this sort of like the polygon created from these 5 points, I think, is what creates the art that I make, and none of that has to do with authors.
I just love that, and also every single one of those people are huge inspirations to me as well. I recently read Jordan Peele's latest curated short story collection called Out Here Screaming.
Yes.
And it's an anthology of horror short stories from different Black writers, and God, it was good. I didn't realize what a big gap there is in horror to have more perspectives like that, and I just loved
I heard very good things about that. It's interesting because most of my life I just wasn't aware of books, and it's funny, I would love to go to bookstores and I would even buy books. I just didn't like to read them so much. But I now, because I put out a novel a year and do my book tour and everything like that, I'm so aware of authors and books coming out now. So that Jordan Peele collection, it's like I can see the cover. I know it's very strange to kind of enter this industry as an outsider, and suddenly I just think, oh, I know this author and whatever. It's also funny because I'll meet authors who are now like my friends now, but I have no perspective on their work or being a fan because I've kind of met them personally, and I have no idea who any of these people are. The amount of times that I'll go to like a big Macmillan party or an author party and everyone it's a who's who of literature, and someone will come up to me and say, oh my gosh, did you just talk to so-and-so? And I say, I have no idea who that is. And then they'll be like, oh, that's this person. I'll say, I've never heard that name in my life. I'm so disconnected that it makes it very silly, actually, me trotting through this world.
I love that for you, though, because doesn't that bring a certain kind of freedom from expectation?
Yes, I think so. I also generally do not... It would be very hard for me to care about fame because, I mean, I've said this before, no one knows my legal identity behind my mask, but I can say, I have been a creator my whole life. From a very young age, I was making art for a living in some medium at a reasonably high level. So because just making things and being around folks that might be considered by some to be famous, that's been my whole life. And there's just I don't have that gear to get too excited about that type of thing. One or two buckaroos I think I would still get a little nervous. But in general, even if I was, meeting one of my favorite actors or someone I was very aware of, that for some reason that stuff it never sinks in for me.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that must be quite, I don't know, maybe a relief for them too. I mean,
yes,
to be able to have an actual conversation with somebody who doesn't feel paralyzed by awe, I guess. Yes, and I will say, knowing a couple of buckaroos who are, the sort of like you recognize them on the street kind of folks in various mediums, you can always, I mean, it's instant when someone comes up as a fan versus someone who you don't know. It's unfortunate because obviously you want the fan interaction to be the best, right? But there is a sort of relaxation and a freedom when someone who has no idea trots up. Because we all want, I guess, funny enough, from a lot of these folks, they will say to me, gosh, you did it right, having a mask. Because I walk around and no one knows who the heck that I am. As big as Chuck ever gets, I am still pretty anonymous, which for an author, not too big of a deal. Most folks wouldn't recognize even their favorite author, but still, it is very nice. that leads quite nicely into my next question, which is, given that you do write it under a pseudonym, does that also bring a certain kind of freedom with your work and with your short stories as well?
Oh, yes, absolutely. When I started out, I did it for a lot of reasons. Some of them were artistic. I knew that I wanted to express certain things and that staying anonymous would help that for the art. I guess the best example I can give of that is, I meet buckaroos at conventions and stuff who will give me hugs and kind of whisper in my ear and say, they'll say something and they'll be like, I've never told someone that in my life, with tears in their eyes. And They can do that because I'm wearing this mask, because, where you wouldn't necessarily feel this free with a human being, the mask allows, it's like in therapy where folks use puppets to kind of talk to each other, like express how they really feel. So that is very powerful. It's powerful being a symbol like that. But for me personally too, I think the things I'm really interested in, I'm really interested in my autism expression and my queerness. And both of those things, if you were to just kind of look at me on the street, these are already kind of like invisible things. You can't really tell those things. And I'm in a hetero presenting relationship. So this really was a way for me to express this part of me that doesn't get to be expressed very often because I'm so good at neurotypically masking and folks don't just assume that you're bisexual. So I think it's very healthy for me in that way because these are parts of my life that don't get acknowledged very much. And I think just in general, having a mask kind of, especially in the early days, allowed me to express those without any sort of fear.
Yeah, I just love that. I love that so much. And I relate to you so heavily as well. I also, I have ADHD and I also have bipolar 2 disorder, but I look normal, and for all intents and purposes, nobody would know unless I chose to tell them. I'm also queer and in a straight presenting relationship too, which I have wrestled with a lot because I'd only ever dated women. And so being in a wonderful, healthy, very happy relationship, but I've had this internal inner turmoil of oh my goodness, now all of a sudden this very obvious presenting identity, the way I move through the world has changed dramatically. Yes. But that's still such a huge part of my identity and who I am, and how do I get to express that or take pride in that now when it's not obvious on a day-to-day, which is why I love to turn to books and reading and film as well and music to try and feed that part of me that still needs acknowledgement.
Oh yes, absolutely. That is exactly what it is. We like to think of the world as existing in this sort of science lab vacuum where you think, well, I'm just going to, I'm dating a man now. So that's not really going to change anything else, right? It won't, but in reality, this will have a cascading effect where you think, oh, okay, now the way that buckaroos talk to me now, am I going to feel different when I go to the pride parade? Are buckaroos going to stare at me and think, what is this person doing here? So, because there are all these kind of domino effects, I think that, and it doesn't get talked about enough, but it is important to still explore these parts of yourself through art or through different things. So yeah, it's good that you're doing that. And then there's all these things where it's you have to consider oh, well, who am I to talk? I'm not as much of a target, for instance, for discrimination and these things. So you have a sort of a guilt, and where do you weigh that? So it's hard, but there's all these things. And I think the important thing to just recognize is that it's complex. And so when you see other folks going through it, it's not an issue of just, gatekeeping or saying this is the one rule, you need to date this many partners to be bi or things like that. It's just recognizing the complexity of this timeline and that there's all different ways of expressing these things and kind of letting buckaroos find it themselves. And for me, it was easy because I had the mask, and for others, it's not so easy, but we got to do it for each other.
So what was the birth of Chuck Tingle? What was I know that you built up a large social media following and you were writing your Tinglers, and then I was so surprised when I heard you speak on the Rodeo Publishing podcast when you explained how you got your first book deal, which is very fascinating to me. But what was the initial birth of Chuck Tingle, and how did your alter identity come to be?
Yes. So the initial genesis was kind of a summary, I guess, a little bit of what we've been talking about. I have always loved art. I have always functioned in a place where I'm constantly expressing myself, whether that's for my job or just, this is just my state. I create all the time. And I felt like there was a part of myself that I wasn't able to express. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be anonymous. And so initially I set up so many layers where I thought, okay, I'm going to post online and there's going to be a lot of metaphor, but it's all going to be true. So it was like, I say, if I post online that I pet a cat, maybe I pet a dog, but it's still kind of like a sort of meta fiction, or I don't even know the word for it. But so I had all these layers, even down to the way that I would dress. I wore a big karate gi because that completely covered my body. You couldn't even see the shape of me. And over time, I have worked to kind of strip away these layers and say, how much of this can I still be a symbol, and kind of get rid of all of the excess stuff and really be like the most pure version of myself. Some folks say, oh, Chuck Tingle's a character. I am not playing a character. This is just a version of myself with a little dusting of metaphor to keep me safe and anonymous. But so I had a lot of that idea from day one. It was just much more covered in metaphor. And then I would say politically, what I was trying to do with my erotica, funny enough, I don't actually see it as comedy. A lot of folks do, and it's fine to laugh at. Even my horror novels are kind of funny. I think I just have a funny sensibility, but I don't have that inner love for comedy that a comedian would. But I initially thought, I want to write these stories that are basically taking what conservatives used to say about what will happen if we allow gay marriage in the United States. They would say, if we let gays get married, then they're going to be marrying, 3 at a time, or marrying a tree, or marrying Bigfoot. And I always thought that was so funny. It would make me laugh so much because I always thought, what is wrong with that? Like, that's your worst case scenario? That sounds wonderful. So I thought, would that really be so bad? No, well, no, it wouldn't. And that's kind of what the Tingleverse is. It's the extrapolation of this conservative dystopian warning. And when you actually read it, you think, well, this is more like a utopia. There's conflict, there's story, but ultimately the Tingleverse is a utopian world, at least the erotica Tingleverse. So that artistically was kind of the point. And then so much happened over the course of this where I realized, oh, my chronic pain started to go away the more that I express myself as Chuck. And it really opened a lot of doors for me. But yeah, the initial genesis was just kind of like to create art. And then I had kind of a political point to make and to express these kind of inner parts of myself.
That's a really interesting point that you made, that you noticed your chronic pain started to ease when you were writing about these things. And that's something I think we're seeing more of, or learning more about, is the ongoing impact of suffering in silence, I suppose you could say, or holding on to these feelings and pain and rage. And I'm actually read Bury Your Gaze First and then Camp Damascus more recently. And as I was reading it, I wondered if there was a sense of catharsis for you without, spoiling anything in the books. But obviously, the book has an ending. And what was that like? Did that offer you a bit of inner healing, I guess? Or catharsis?
Well, I see horror as actually two separate genres. I see it as, I call it grueling horror or cathartic horror. I think that the genre functions in two distinct ways, and they kind of need each other to work. I would say grueling horror is the horror where you go in as a sort of challenge to yourself. I would compare it to like listening to really dissonant music, or riding a roller coaster, or having a really spicy food that is painful, where you are testing yourself in a way to see how messed up is this going to be that I can come out on the other side. And what happens in those movies is it gets worse and worse for the character. And even if it seems like they might get out, they don't. And you leave kind of bummed, but then it kind of reaches through the fourth wall and you become thrilled, mostly by the fact that you're not the one that just died. You're seeing this fictional character go through it, and then it gives you kind of like a new lease on life, because you have this perspective and you get to think, well, I'm not in that situation. And so that's great. That's grueling horror. Cathartic horror, instead of kind of breaking the fourth wall to give you catharsis outside of it, the catharsis happens in the text or in the film. So that would be, have the character, they all start dying. There's a bunch of punishment to the character. And then in the third act, they turn the tables and then suddenly they stab the stabber and you get to cheer and you feel this sort of revenge catharsis. And so a lot of them function in that way too. I see those, every horror movie kind of falls into one of those. And what makes it an exciting genre is that as a viewer or a reader, you don't know which one it's going to be. That's where the tension lies. And it kind of only works if you flip the coin and you get one or the other sometimes, because you really have to believe, oh, I don't know, this could end up being really grueling and really hard on me. I like cathartic horror. I hesitate to say that, but out of the two, that's the one I like. And the reason I hesitate is because I think if you know that, it makes the experience a little worse going in, because you can tell, oh, okay, everything's going to be okay at the end. Some folks like that. I still like a little bit of the tension, but I will say I like cathartic horror. So generally that's where it's going to end up.
Yeah, I've never really considered the two different options. And as you were speaking, I could see, reflecting on movies I've seen in the past and thinking about which ones sit where. And you will have seen this, surely, I bet, because it's one of the most famous horror movies of all time, but it was also the biggest bummer I've ever seen in my life. What was it called? Is it the cave or the depths? The deep?
The Descent?
The Descent. Oh my God.
Yes.
Oh my God. Last year I went to see that with my partner. He'd already seen it years ago, but it was playing at the Hollywood Cinema, which is this glorious, old-fashioned, enormous movie theater, as though it's been frozen in time since like the 60s or the 70s. And they screen old movies. That's that's basically exclusively what they screen. They had a screening of the Descent, and Sam had said to me, look, this was the best horror movie, but the biggest bummer. And, without going into the details, that movie stayed with me because it was...
It is great.
Haunting.
That is a wonderful, wonderful movie. And I personally don't like the ending. Although, depending on where you watch it, I think it has a different ending now.
Yes.
I think they updated it.
They did. We've got the ultra bummer ending.
Yes.
That's the one I saw where I was like, oh my God, I feel terrible.
Yes, and I personally don't love that, but I also, artistically, there's a very important place for it. I mean, some of the best horror movies are that to an extreme. I mean, I would say the movie Martyrs, the original French one, probably one of the best horror movies ever made, and it is, I cannot fathom a bigger bummer of a film, but it is so good. And it's just important for the genre to say, it's like you have to have that threat. Is that gonna be there? And then here's a really good example, because I'm thinking of like something like the Hills Have Eyes remake is built to be a horrible bummer in such an extreme way. Funny enough, for being so notoriously grueling, that is spoilers for those who haven't seen it. That is actually cathartic horror. The whole thing of that movie functions on the third act. There's like this incredible revenge killing spree by the last human, and it's amazing. After getting that tense and getting that angry at the monsters, when the tables are turned, you're just like, you're on board. So there's so many. I mean, I guess I brought up Scream's like that too. The shift happens at the very end, but it's like when Sydney kind of takes charge, and then you're shouting, "Get Out!" Another great one. Get Out was, Jordan Peele had a different ending for that, and then changed it to like the TSA ending, and it's one of the best endings of a horror movie of all time, because it's set up for you to think, oh, this is going to be grueling horror, it's going to teach us this lesson, and then he says, you know what, I'm going to give you that catharsis, and it feels great.
I can sort of see your love of screen come through in Camp Damascus and Bury Your Gaze, because there is something I love about your horror novels is your use of monsters and how creative you are with the beings that are coming after our main characters. Where do you get your inspiration from for these creatures and these things? Because they are so scary and they're so unique and original. I'm like, man, that is so... I don't know what to expect. It's so cool.
Oh, thank you. I think with horror, there's a couple of things. Here's another piece of advice that I do not adhere to. You will generally hear folks say you don't have to write the greatest novel ever written. And because I think a lot of folks kind of stop because of that. So the general advice is like, you can just tell the story. And that's fair for some. For me, everything that I write has to be like, it can't already exist. I could never just sit down and think, okay, I'm going to write a werewolf book and it's just going to be the same werewolves that you know about. Camp Damascus, very good example of that. It's a demon book, but the demons are very, very different. So starting off, if I have an idea, I know that I'm not even going to start doing it if I can't do a version of that idea that's like completely unique, or that at least I'm not aware of anyone doing before. So, and I can say with Camp Damascus, it's not really a spoiler because they show up pretty early, but the demons in that, I think for horror, and for any creators listening, horror is about the absurd entering our reality and how that changes things. Fear really is, like, if you think of any, like a random scary image of, if you were to wake up and look out, hear a noise outside and look out in your front yard, and you were to see like a vampire standing there, it's not actually that scary because a vampire belongs in the dark in your spooky front yard. I find it to be like, what if there was someone there that is truly an absurd version? I think a lot of folks think that's why clowns are so scary. But for my example of Camp Damascus, the demons in that are wearing red polo shirts and like khakis, and they have name tags. They're dressed like they're at Target. And I think they're working at Target. So I think if you really think about like in real life, if you saw a pale, kind of like sickly, stringy-haired, scary person wearing a Target uniform, there's something to me that makes that so much scarier than just the full package of, oh, it's just a monster. I feel like you need a couple of drops of absurdity to really like say this is something truly strange entering reality.
That makes me think of Get Out by Jordan Peele, and that daytime scene where he's meeting the family at that big lunch and he has that interaction with, I forget the character's name, but the guy who has been brainwashed, and then you suddenly, after he takes the photo, he suddenly snaps out of it. And that, in this broad daylight setting, in this garden setting, was so haunting and so unsettling. And that's a really interesting point around, it doesn't always have to be
yes
as scary and dark as maybe you might think.
Well, there's some genres that I think, or some like subgenres of horror that function on that very well, like a sort of gothic, like, you know, there's definitely room for the story of someone going to a castle in Transylvania and a vampire is there and it's spooky and it's covered in cobwebs and on and on. That is an important thing that sets up the trope. I guess it's more just like what I'm interested in is what is another version of that really, really amps up the here's reality, how real can we make this feel, and then we're going to drop in something very unique. Funny enough, I try so hard not to talk about my ideas because I have a 4-book deal now. Lucky Day's the first of 4. And so I try not to talk about my future books, but I will say, I think one of those books is going to be a vampire book with a very unique take on vampires that I don't think I've ever heard before, which is, I can't believe there's a vampire take that hasn't been done before, but it's, those are the ideas that I seek out, is how can we turn this on its head a little bit?
That leads quite nicely into another question I have for you, which is, what would you love to see more of in the genre?
Oh, wow. Honestly, this might be a boring answer, but horror, I think, is doing so well, and there's so much of it that I feel like it would be almost arrogant of me to say, because like it's already so diverse, and so it's I'm just like blown away. The fact that like there's, like I said, a horror movie a week, there's queer horror, there's all these different types of horror movies coming out that I don't know. I'm really happy with where it's at. I want more of the same. I want more of, and the same being different. I want the diversity and the stuff that I've been seeing kind of like bubble up so much lately. It's like you're asking me how the winning team could play better. I feel like horror's doing pretty good.
I agree. There has been so much excellent horror and so many excellent horror novels. I think when I was growing up and reading horror from a young age, it really felt like at the time, good horror, Stephen King was sort of the only one really considered to be doing good horror. But now there is just so many interesting different versions on the genre, speaking particularly in the book space, and so many fascinating takes coming out. I'm quite curious to see how current world events and political events are going to influence the genre moving forward. I think we've sort of seen a bit of a rise in dark fiction, dark contemporary fiction, as a response to feeling oppressed or feeling the stress and pressure from external forces. So what do you think? Do you think we'll see more of that in the years to come?
I think times like these do produce, like, I think all art is kind of political, but I would see more explicitly political art. I know for myself, that's the case. Like I'm always, I think, politics and sort of like that kind of messaging is always pretty at the forefront of what I do, because I do write with a message in mind. But I can just really see that becoming more and more pushed to the forefront, which I think is great. I think art is like a wonderful form of protest. And so I'm excited about it. I was just posting about this online because it's such a funny, strange thing, but like, bury your gaze. There's an AI subplot, and for those who haven't read it, I won't go into details, but it does have a lot to do with generative AI. And when I wrote that book, I thought, gosh, people are going to have a really hard time with this because no one's going to believe it. Like, this is way too far gone that in the first chapter, they talk about how Best Picture, one of the nominees is like a fully AI generated performance of a dead actor. And so I thought, no one's going to follow me there. It's too futuristic. And within the time that I wrote it to when it was on the shelves, all the generative AI stuff happened. And so everyone got it. In the early drafts, I thought, I'm going to have to maybe change this for something else. And then I thought, oh, wow, no, okay. And so there's a meme about The Simpsons predicting things. And I kind of feel like that about my books. And then now Lucky Day coming out, there's a huge part of Lucky Day that is kind of like it's a bit of an ACAB book. It's a bit of a government oversight, kind of like with comparisons to things like the Patriot Act in the United States and things like that, is a big theme of it. And now with what's going on in the States, I just keep thinking, gosh, I gotta write about nicer things because they keep coming true. Between me writing my book and when it's on the shelf, the big theme of the book seems to happen and then match up with the current day.
I just finished reading the other day Parable of the Sower, and I know I'm so late to the party because it's a extremely famous book by Octavia E. Butler, and I found it so shocking and hard going because even though she wrote it in like the late 80s, early 90s, it begins in 2024, and it is so prescient. It's like she predicted the future. It is haunting. Just so it kind of meant that instead of receiving this book as entertainment or a science fiction dystopian, something way out of the realms of what would be possible, it felt like reading just a memoir or the diary entries of a young girl living in poverty in the States today. It was so chilling how accurately she predicted what would happen in 2024 and 2025, which I think is a really interesting phenomenon. And who knows how things are going to play out and what we'll see moving forward, and what was considered to be quite far out dystopian ideas will actually just become quite normal, like Black Mirror, right? It's like,
yes,
we used to watch Black Mirror and think, oh my gosh, that's crazy, but now it's the world, life is Black Mirror.
Yes. Well, it's not, I mean, art is, these are these messages that we need to tell each other. That book is a message to you, right? And the thing is that it's like, when it becomes art is when you're delivering it in a way that can't just be told. It has to be this work of fiction or a song or a movie, but you are delivering an emotion or a message, sometimes political, in a unique, separate way. And so I can see how some of these important messages from the past are now coming back and looping around, and they're whispering into our ears again. I think that art has an incredible power of doing that. And sometimes, like a feedback loop, every time it comes around, it gets a little louder and it makes a little more sense. And that those can be scary realizations.
Very interesting idea. I think it speaks to the importance of art, right? It's like you never know when that's going to resonate with somebody, or who it's going to resonate with,
yes,
or what it's going to mean in years to come, because it might take on a new meaning. So you've got Lucky Day coming out, which is very, very exciting, and a 4-book deal. How do you approach a new project? What's your process for starting a new story?
So I write message-based. This is another thing you're not supposed to say. Everyone in writing, you're supposed to say, do your characters drive the story, or does the plot? And you're supposed to say character. I say neither. I say message. That is, I have what is the gift that I am giving the reader? The only thing, like, I would be a terrible critic because I pretty much love everything. The only thing that bothers me is if I feel like I'm not being respected as the receiver, and like I feel like I'm either being bored or like just not considered, that there is no message for me. Even if that message is, here's 2 hours of giant robots beating each other up and having, entertainment, that's still a message. But I just need to feel like I've been considered. And so for me, the process is, what is something that I really care about? And then the other part of that is like, I tend to write high concept ideas, which a lot of folks, it's so funny how much people talk about high concept and don't know what it means. Most people think that it means like really artsy, heady stuff, when it's actually kind of the opposite. High concept just means something that you could sell with like a 1-sentence pitch, where the concept is what sells it, not necessarily like the actors attached. It's like a screenwriting term. So I tend to write high concept. Jordan Peele is another very high concept creator. And so, yeah, that is kind of what I do. And then when I come up with a high concept idea, I've always got like 10 of them rattling around in my brain, and then that crashes into something that, like a message I really want to deliver, something I really personally care about. Then I say, that's the next book I'm going to work on. So, I had one of those for Camp Damascus. I had one for Barrier Gaze, and there's definitely one for Lucky Day. So it's like, it's a combination of kind of a high concept that I find is interesting or clever, and then it has to crash into like maybe a political message or a personal message.
I can see that having a message focus for the book over necessarily character or plot might make it easier to keep going with it, right? Like keep going with a project, because if you really believe in that message. It's
really, really good for things that you wouldn't consider, like even the names of something, like your theme. If you're right, if you have this whole novel, and then there's so many times where there's little details that kind of shouldn't matter, just like, what does this person order at the restaurant? What is, what's the number of the room that they're staying in? Things that generally are just going to be randomly generated. Pretty much all of mine, if you like Google what they mean or something, they all end up making sense with the theme or the message, because I can always, if I ever have a question about like, okay, what happens next? What happens here? I can just think, well, what is the message of this? Like, what is the point of this? And it will answer every question that you ever have about it. And I find it to be very funny that if you read like a review, whether it's a movie or a Goodreads review, the amount of folks that say like, oh, this had too much of a political agenda, like they seem to downgrade art or like say that having a message is like a mark off, is just astonishing to me, that we've deluded ourselves into thinking that having a message in art means that it's somehow worse. It blows my mind. And there's actually a pretty big history of why that is, and how kind of, at least in the United States, the government kind of tried to fund people moving away from concrete messaging and moving towards abstract art is a real thing that the CIA actually did. But it's funny. It's just so ingrained that you're not supposed to have politics or a point, and I find that to be very silly.
I wonder what those types of people would find to be good art if they take
that is a very good point.
That has a message.
That is a good point, is that like all art is political, and I'm glad folks are kind of realizing that, but I don't necessarily blame them, because if you go to, if you go to English class or whatever, or these things, like we are taught to kind of hide what we mean, to use abstraction in a way. And abstraction is great. Like there's a time and a place for it. I have so many layers in my book. Like you want something that's thick and juicy that you can dive into these other layers. Like I get it. But at the same time, the idea that we need to like obfuscate what we mean, and it's not good art if we just say what we mean, is, I think, only there because we've been told it so many times, and people have a really hard time stepping outside themselves and actually thinking, okay, I know I've been told this by every teacher that I've had, but why? What is the point? And funny enough, the why is, a lot of it is because, this sounds like a dang conspiracy theory, but folks can look it up. The CIA did fund, when the hippies were getting popular and stuff, a lot of abstract art, because they knew that it wasn't as effective, and they wanted people to move towards thinking only abstraction is cool. And so it kind of got in the way of a lot of the political art, because that was just kind of coming right out and saying something, and people were getting behind it. So it's an interesting, fascinating history, but I guess for any listeners, one, go look into that. It's amazing. And two, just because something is just telling you what it wants to tell you, that is not any flaw in art.
Yes, I agree. I am going to look that up, because that also feels particularly prescient given the proposed changes around education in the United States in particular.
Yes.
And I think we should always be questioning why, or what, or more like listening to your own intuition and making decisions for yourself. Like, do you enjoy that? Or
it's
how
very
do you
hard.
that?
It's very hard for artists to do that. I think if I'm going to give myself one pat on the back, it is that I don't really have that in me. There's no part of me, if something's been done a certain way, there's no part of me that thinks, oh, I have to do it that way. I also think that's part of being autistic, to be honest. And so that is part of me, is I just have never felt the need to conform to these things, but especially artistically. So because of that, I just have kind of charted my own course through this. And I think that's another reason why, while I said that I have been a creator my whole life from a very young age, some assume that I've been in books a long time, or that I must be another writer. And I can say without completely taking off the mask, let's just say that it's very, very unlikely that I have experience in the book industry. So I kind of come at this as an outsider, and there's all these rules that I might have picked up if I was like in books my whole life, that I just come in this and think, well, that doesn't make sense to me, so I'm not going to do it. And then it ends up working.
So with that in mind, what's it been like for you working with a traditional publisher versus self-publishing?
Oh my gosh. Well, the first thing is, with self-publishing, I can take a thought or a feeling or an idea, and then in 24 hours express myself through it. That's what the Tinglers are. That's what my short form erotica is. And with traditional publishing, especially novel length, it's going to be like a year or two before the book you write comes out. So there's this huge lag on how much your feelings are going to resonate with like the timeline around them. weirdly, like I mentioned, mine seems to line up where I'm almost predicting the future with some of these, which is great. But I think the time is kind of an interesting one to get used to. The other one, of course, is dealing with like large corporate entities. I have a punk rocker deep inside of my soul. And so I am well aware that these large corporate entities sometimes will sand down the interesting edges of art. And fortunately and amazingly, Macmillan is my big publisher, but really it's Tor, and even smaller than that, it's Nightfire, the horror division of Tor. They kind of let me do whatever I want. So I am in a really good position. And I think it's because with any creator, there are kind of like working creators who you hire them, they put out stuff. You see it a lot with directors, like a director who could just pop into a franchise and they can do a Marvel movie or whatever. And not that there's anything wrong with that. Like, this is a very important role, is just kind of like a working director, a working writer, a working musician like that. For my books, it's more like an auteur thing where it's like they don't spend a bunch of money to sign Chuck Tingle and then not expect a Chuck Tingle book. So I've put myself in a really good position of, yeah, they could tell me what to do, but like that would be a very bad thing to do with their investment. They don't want me to be like a workhorse writer. They want me to be like this specialized, unique thing. So they kind of just let me do what I want, which is incredible. Like, that's very rare in as far as like a high level big five publisher situation.
That's amazing. I think that sounds sounds like the dream for a lot of people, which is great to know that it's not impossible, you know?
Yes, it's not, but you have to come at it in a very specific way. I think I hesitate to give too much advice because I like to just share like what worked for me and then say, maybe it'll work for you. That's not necessarily like advice, but if there's one piece of advice that I am comfortable sharing, I always tell people, whether you are a musician looking for a big record deal or a actor looking for a big studio contractor or a writer looking for a big five publisher, never ever like beg for that deal. Never ever look at it like, oh, I am so lucky to be picked up out of obscurity. You need to come to buckaroos in these positions of power with your own position of power. Maybe that's just in your head, but you are two equal entities coming to an agreement together. It's not a lotto ticket. It's not something that you won. It is an even business transaction. And in that case, you'll make a deal that you want. The example I always come back to is that in the United States, there was a show, American Idol. And when you won American Idol, you won a record contract. And no one ever asked, what's the contract? How much money? It was just the concept of a contract to so many Americans was the prize itself. Not a good contract, not a whatever contract, just the contract. And I think way too many buckaroos still have that mentality without realizing you don't want just a contract. You want an equal business opportunity between the two of you to create the art you want to create and to share it with more people.
I think that's great advice. I think if there's something about you that really inspires me, is I think you're really a testament to the power you can have in owning your point of view, your ideas, your personality, your brand, and letting that be a really key driving feature, not just of the art you produce, but also of, you know, how impactful it is. It's like you're not trying to fit into a bubble or be a certain type of person that you think will get you published. It's like you just made the art you want to make and found your own little niche, and that is actually your secret sauce. And I think that a lot of people would find that really inspiring as well.
Oh, thank you very much.
Well, do you want to finish up just chatting a little bit more about Lucky Day, when it's coming out, and where people can go to pre-order your new book?
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so Lucky Day, I, basically am on this track to put out a horror novel every summer, a queer horror novel every summer based on the last few and the ones that are coming out in the future. So that is kind of what I'm going to be doing. And so this next one that's coming out this summer is Lucky Day. It is about a bisexual statistics professor who there's a big kind of worldwide catastrophe, and it makes her think that statistics and probability might not be real and she might not exist. And so it's kind of like a taking, actually I can go through what I said about like high concept ideas. So for this, the idea was bisexuals, as we mentioned, kind of get told they don't exist a lot. And I just always think whenever I hear that, I would love to do a story where a bisexual goes to battle with actual non-existence, because it's such a silly thing to even say, and we hear it all the time. So I thought, okay, a bisexual versus non-existence, and so that's kind of like the crux of it. And yeah, it's coming out this summer, and also you can pre-order it. I know that pre-orders are kind of like not a lot of buckaroos do them.
I love a pre-order because it's like a future gift to yourself. It's like you forget that you made the pre-order, and then it shows up, and it's like a present.
It's great. And also, like I think the video game industry, I know that I've heard that like there's a lot of pre-orders and that have like taken advantage of people as far as like they there's like all these things that pre-orders kind of have a bad name in many industries, but in books it's so important because one, it determines the amount of advertising money that your publisher will put behind you. It literally will determine how many of your books will be on stock on the shelves in stores, because they literally measure the size of the shelf and how many books can even fit on it. All this stuff is calculated by pre-orders. So if there is art that you like, I would highly recommend pre-ordering. The other really important thing is that counts towards first week sales for bestseller lists. So like for an author, one of the best things you can do is to pre-order their book. So if this is interesting to you and you enjoyed the podcast, then like taking a moment to pre-order Lucky Day, huge deal.
I will be going to my local bookstore today after this to put my pre-order in, and then it's a double whammy. I get to support you and them.
Yes.
Everybody wins.
You know what I actually love about this is a punk rocker buckaroos. I often get this question of what's like the best place to order, a book to support an author. And I think most people say that thinking like, oh, it's going to be one of the big retail, your Amazon, your Barnes and Noble. Funny enough, because of the way at least in the States, the way that the New York Times bestseller list works is they weigh indie bookstores more. So funny enough, and I love being able to say this, technically the best way to support an author is to pre-order a hardcover from an indie bookstore. Which is like such a great, and it's like it's very so rare wholesome. It's very rare that something works out like that, where it is actually kind of like the ethically best way is also the best way for the artist, but in this case it is true.
I love that. That's amazing. And also, as a bisexual girly, I am so excited about Lucky Day. I'm like, that's going to be our queer book. I'm in a queer book club, and that is going to be our pick when it comes out.
Oh, that's great. Yes, I'm so curious. I mean, it means so much to me as a bisexual buckaroo. And it's funny because versus all the other books, like the queerness in this one is almost in like the subtext. It's like this, it's not, in Camp Damascus, the queerness is like the thing. In Barry Gaze, the queerness is the thing. In Lucky Day, the queerness is like the symbol almost. And so I hope it resonates. I think that it will, because funny enough, for the one where it's like more symbolic, it's the one that's the most personal to me as like a bi buckaroo myself. So who knows? You never know how art's going to work out, but I really, from the bottom of my heart, if this can be cathartic for a lot of like bi buckaroos who feel ignored and love the idea of like going toe to toe with nothingness, I'm very excited. I hope it resonates.
I think it's an excellent premise, and immediately, just as you were describing the plot, oh my gosh, I feel that in my soul, like as a bisexual woman dating a man. The erasure and the internalized biphobia is so real. So I'm very, very excited to read it, and I'll be talking about it as well across my channels too. And oh my gosh, I'm so excited. You've got more books coming out too. One a year. We are so lucky. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today, Chuck. It's been excellent. I just am such a huge fan, and you make me feel like the world is a better place.
Oh, you're very kind. Thank you for having me. And honestly, you know, as we talk about art like a book or a song, but like things like this, like a podcast or like even reviews or like that is such an important expression as well, an important art form. So thank you for creating like this place where these ideas can be explored for all kinds of buckaroos safely. So important. So thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing what's next from you.